Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to our continuing coverage of Microsoft PowerPivot and data models. Now, in the first part, we constructed a very simple data model using two related tables or two linked tables, and we did that within Microsoft Excel. Now that's perfectly acceptable to do that, to build your data model within Excel, but the whole point of PowerPivot really is to access external data, to access an external data model of some kind, a model contained within an external database or some other storage. There's a reason for that. Building data models within Excel is not as efficient as using a PowerPivot to access an external model. The reason for it is that PowerPivot uses a particular kind of storage engine, a storage engine known as X-Velocity, and it's much more efficient than the standard Excel storage engine. I'm not going to go into the technical details of all that, but suffice it to say that the whole point of PowerPivot is to access an external data model. So we'll see how that works now by looking at an example database called AdventureWorks. Now, AdventureWorks occurs in two different varieties. And these two different varieties have essentially the same data, but the data is structured differently within each one. In the first variety is called AdventureWorks OLTP. OLTP stands for Online Transactional Processing. And we shall take a look at what this looks like by looking at the relationships of the tables. So, here's all the tables within this AdventureWorks database, and as you can see, the relationships, which are shown by the lines here, they're rather haphazard. They're going all over the place. And this structure, the OLTP structure, is intended to facilitate transactions. And by a transaction, I mean the recording of a sale, or the recording of a new customer, or the updating of a vendor, and so on. These are all transactions, and the OLTP structure will facilitate the processing of transactions. Now, we're interested in analysis, so we take a look at this other structure, which is the data warehouse structure, also known as OLAP, which means online analytical processing. And the structure is much different here in that it consists of a central fact table, and that central fact table is surrounded by these dimension tables in a pattern known as a star configuration. And these dimension tables, they express different aspects of the fact table. So here we have the sales table and the different aspects of sales, such as customer, territory, product, and date, and so on. And the whole point of this structuring, or OLAP, is to facilitate data analysis. And that's what PowerPivot is all about. Data analysis, and so we'll take a look at how it's done using an external data source. We go into PowerPivot, we go into Manage Data Models. We have no model. We're going to get one from an external data source, and we're going to get it from a database, from an Access database, and we're going to use the AdventureWorks data warehouse, or the AdventureWorks OLAP. We're going to pick from a list of tables, and we're going to pick our central fact sales table and our surrounding date, product, and customer. And we'll finish this up. Here, PowerPivot is now building the data model, and we're done, and it's been successful. If it hadn't been successful, there'd be some kind of error messages here, and we go into details and find out what the errors are all about, but in this case we're good, so we just continue on. And here is our PowerPivot data model in data view, showing all of our tables here: customer, date, product, and sales. Now we can go into diagram view to see what this looks like diagrammatically, and here we see the star configuration here, the central fact sales table surrounded by dimensions of the sales: customer, product, date. Okay, this is our data model. Again, a data model is nothing more than just a bunch of linked tables, and we're going to build a pivot table now using this data model. We'll put it in this existing worksheet, and we're going to take a look at product color. So we go to the product table, we get color, that'll be our rows here, and we're going to look at color over the years, over time. There are different date. So we go into calendar, fiscal year, and we're going to summarize things by sales amount. So we go into sales amount, and there's our pivot table, which shows color, product color over the years. Now, why color? Well, there could be some kind of a trend in color. For example, customers may choose a certain color over the, which increases over the years, so we can see that trend if it did exist. But this is not so much an actual analysis as it is illustration of what we can do with PowerPivot. Now, let's go back to our data model here. We're going to data view. Now we take a look at this table, our central table here, and we notice it has sales amount, total product cost. What if we were interested in looking at a profit versus time on products? Well, there's no column here for profit. Well, it just so happens that PowerPivot has an internal programming language or an internal calculating language called DAX. DAX stands for Data Analysis Extension, I do believe. Well, whatever. We can use DAX to create another column here for profit. So we'll insert that new column right over here, and we'll call it gross margin for profit. Oops, gross margin. And we'll use DAX to calculate what the gross margin is. It's the same thing as it's very similar to ordinary Excel formulas, except whereas an Excel formula works on individual cells, DAX works on columns of data. So we're going to get, and gross margin equals sales amount minus product cost, and that's what we want. And so there it is. The whole column has been calculated all the way down here we can see the gross margin for all of our product sales here. So, based upon this new column, we can now create a new pivot table. We'll put it in a new worksheet. We'll do the same thing. We'll get color and time, fiscal year, whoops, and put it over there. And now we'll put in our summarize things by a new column. Instead of sales amount, we'll get it gross margin. And there we go. And so here, the same thing as our last pivot table, except now we have summarized by gross margin. Summarized by gross margin as opposed to total sales amount. So that's how we utilize PowerPivot with an external data model. Now keep in mind that even though we built our data model using an external data source, here we've modified things, but the modification is done only to the internal PowerPivot model. The original data model, the original database has not been modified. In a sense, PowerPivot is read-only. So we can modify our data model within PowerPivot, and our original data source will be unaffected. And that's basically how this works. And keep in mind that we can get external data from a wide variety of different sources, from Microsoft SQL Server, Microsoft Access, from an Oracle database or other databases, and we can get it from an Excel file or from a text file, let's say a CSV file, which is a comma separated value file. And we can pick different tables from different databases and link them all together internally and so on. So it's a very powerful, very flexible, versatile way of implementing a pivot. And a pivot really is nothing more than the rotation axis of an OLAP cube. And here we have specifically used an OLAP database. But next time perhaps we'll take a look at the DAX language in more detail. Right now we just sort of touch the surface here with our gross margin column and our DAX formula. But perhaps next time we'll examine DAX formulas in more detail. But anyway, that's how it's done with external data models. And we thank you all for listening, and we hope you found this useful or at least interesting.